Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. You can check us out at legionsc.com or follow us on Instagram at legion.sc. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the competition landscape for CrossFit or whatever we now call CrossFit, if in fact there is some disruption in terms of affiliations and competition structure and all that. So a lot of folks have some events on their calendar circled throughout the year that they plan on competing in. People plan on competing in the open. Maybe people have a few sanctionals that they like to do. Maybe people have some local competitions throughout the year that they like to do. And we have two things really disrupting that landscape for people. We have the recent controversy with Greg Glassman and the upheaval to the structure of CrossFit HQ, and who knows what that actually means for the CrossFit Games. And then we also have the fact that we're still not done with COVID-19, right? That the fact that there's a global pandemic still going on with rising cases throughout different parts of the world and likely pretty long-term restrictions in many places in terms of getting a bunch of people together in the same spot, especially a bunch of people together in the same spot to exercise at high intensity. I think we're going to see a lot of challenges with getting live events to happen, right? That the sanctional season is potentially totally disrupted from both of these issues. And, we're located in Chicago, and I think we've mentioned this in the past on the podcast. We run a competition called the South Loop Games, which we do in our gym every year. And we typically do that in November. There's no way we're going to be able to run that, right? That the number of people we would have to have in one spot to be able to do that. And just the appetite, let's say, for people to come in and do some sort of competition like that, I think is going to be non-existent. So the competition landscape is probably not coming back anytime soon, right? That the soonest we might see some large competitions, I think, is going to be in 2021. We might see a few one-off types of things happen, but the reality is for a lot of these events as well, the financial structure of it just doesn't make any sense either. Like you're going to have reduced registrations. Sponsors are not going to want to invest the types of money that they've invested in the past because you're not going to be able to have large crowds. So the economic infrastructure for these things just doesn't make a whole lot of sense currently. So for people thinking about training, they like to have something circled on their calendar. If you're a runner, you like to have a 5K coming up. If you, do CrossFit, you'd like to have some sort of online qualifier you're going to do or whatever. So it can be difficult for people to actually find the motivation to train and to figure out what they're actually training for, given the uncertainty with what's potentially coming down the pipeline. So Luke, what have you seen from athletes in terms of, mindset related to this, questions people have, concerns people have with their training direction, and just sort of the general, let's say, gestalt of what's going on?
Yeah, so I've had a couple of conversations with clients, and also just people and just friends as well, and about what's going to sort of happen for the future in terms of competing. I think a lot of people are sort of hypothesizing that like the Open is going to be the first competition that they will get back into, and we may see even more of a drop in terms of participation this year. I think that people were expecting the 2021 Open to have an increase in participation after there being two in 2019, but I'm not too sure if we're actually going to see that. So I think that there is a lot of uncertainty right now, but I also think that there's going to be some opportunities that might come about as well. I think that you're probably going to have people, that I think online competitions is going to be the format for a while. And we've just seen this weekend that just passed, the road competition sort of made that online format just a lot more solid and a lot more, I'm just trying to think of the word. We saw all of the athletes using exactly the same setup, exactly the same barbells and equipment. I'm pretty sure that independent online competitions are not going to be sending equipment out to people, but we've also, we've seen a development there, which is going to allow people to potentially progress to the competitions that they're running. and create something that's probably going to be a little bit fairer than what we've seen it with online qualifiers and the Open in years past. I think as well, obviously, as you know, you have a lot of athletes that are sort of starting to, you've had athletes and you had sanctional events start to disassociate themselves with CrossFit and say that they're not going to compete in the games this year, and they're not going to have any association with the brand CrossFit. I think that you might end up seeing these sanctional events actually sort of that now sort of creating a bit of a group whereby people sort of have another avenue of competition, and the avenue of competition being a little bit more of a format, say for instance like sports like golf or tennis or Formula One, where you have all of these competitions that are going on around the world throughout the year, but then you obviously have this sort of online leaderboard. I mean, that's talking of things at the very, very elite level, but I think that the online competition format, the local competition format, that's something that's still going to exist. Local competitions are still going to be cropping up, but probably it's going to be a while until that happens. We've discussed this in a couple of podcasts previously, where you're probably looking at local competitions being the first ones to be set up, maybe at some point in 2021. But then again, this is obviously this whole situation with COVID-19 is developing in in different areas of the world. They're taking on different stances with it. I think what I've tried to say to people who have had concerns around this is that train as if you are still training for the Open, or you're still training for that competition that's going to be happening, say for instance next year. We'll still look to peak around that time. I think a lot of people are worried that peaking too early or peaking for a competition that isn't necessarily going to exist is going to disrupt their long-term training plan. But in actual fact, that's actually probably what you actually need to do to sort of create a good, successful long-term training plan. You need to go through periods of time where you are peaking and you are sort of realizing your potential within a sporting scenario. That could be just running yourself through a testing week, that could be going through an online competition, that could be going through the Open later in the year. But I think that having some level of peaking occur in your training, and then bringing it back down, and then going through some more accumulation phases of training where you are going through a quote unquote off season. I think that's going to be important for people to do. It's going to give them direction. But I think as well as that, there has to be an enjoyment around training. I've been telling people, if there's certain things that they actually want to do in their training, they have a little bit of a creative license on what they do. And they can adjust certain days if they feel like doing something else, especially those people who are still training at home. It's going to be very, very difficult for them to do, to sort of maintain the same amount of motivation. So I think that there's an importance there around enjoying what you're doing and making sure that training has maybe a little bit more of this experience layer rather than this like objective layer that you're constantly working towards a competition or a date or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. I agree with you that the Rogue Invitational was super impressive, right? That was one of the more impressive things I've seen in terms of deploying technology and figuring something out based upon a changing situation. So that was awesome. But like you mentioned, that's at an elite level where there's a lot of resources and a lot of interest and a lot of attention being paid to what's going on. And I don't think anything like that is going to be realistic for people not operating at the kind of level that Rogue is, with the kind of sponsorship money and people involved in creating something like that. So, we may continue to see ongoing online competitions, things that look more like the various qualifiers, things that look like the Open, et cetera. But that return to in-person competition, I think, is going to be quite a ways off for most people in most whatever countries, locations around the world. I like what you're saying about trying to think about long-term progression in terms of, sort of waving up and down between peaks and valleys, and really focusing in on sport-specific scenarios for a little while and then backing off from that. And that's just kind of the natural progression in training. And that's something we talk about a lot. It's like, okay, how do you find the rhythm between times when you're really dialing in and doing a lot of sport-specific stuff and times that you're sort of pulling back, maybe not doing as much volume on thrusters and power cleans and working on your weird rib cage problems and all that kind of stuff. And that there's sort of a natural rhythm that people can end up falling into based upon the structure of a season. And yeah, as coaches, we do try to guide people and say, okay, well, let's pick a few things to really focus on and maybe not focus on something every 6 weeks or whatever. And then other folks need to be pushed a little bit to get out of their comfort zone and be like, hey, you just got to try and compete because you're really pretty good at training in the gym. And I think you need to just expose yourself a little bit more and sort of see where you sit, and that you'll learn a lot more from putting yourself out there and seeing what happens than you will from continuing to go through various progressions on chest to bar pull-ups or whatever. And that's the role of a coach. And in the current situation, it's not going to be as simple as, okay, well, let's just pick an event and do it. It's going to be more about making those decisions based upon kind of a theoretical outline of what's going on. And I think as a coach, I feel comfortable coming up with some sort of idea of what that should look like. I imagine you feel comfortable coming up with some sort of idea of what that should look like. But I think for athletes, it might not be as simple as, okay, great, this seems like a reasonable plan for the next 6 months. This seems like a good time to just try to peak in the gym and see what happens. And then we'll go back down and go from there. That doesn't have the same, let's say, urgency. It doesn't have the same motivation tied to it. It doesn't have the same excitement. It doesn't have the same ability to stack, see where you sit and stack yourself up against other people. It's just kind of, I imagine it falls flat for a lot of people. So what do you think about in terms of communicating to athletes with, hey, here's the plan, here's what we're going to work on, and trying to get folks excited to engage in that?
Well, I think there's like a couple of ways you can go around it. I think maybe downplaying it a little bit, maybe not just, just getting them to focus on the day-to-day training. I think that there's something to that. I think that, there's, especially people who receive remote coaching, I think there's a tendency just to sort of overanalyze things and think, okay, how am I going to feel and what are we doing and what's this leading to and things like that. And, it may be just sort of breaking it down to the point where you say, okay, well, you're just going to feel a lot more comfortable going through, typical couplets and triplets and chaos that you find in CrossFit in say 3 months than you are right now. Right now, you're doing this type of stuff in like an EMOM format. You're looking at just trying to build up some volume over time and get comfortable doing, a couple of 100 reps every week and then doing that. And then say in 3 months time, what we're actually looking to do is just get you comfortable doing, a workout like this, and then doing a workout of a similar intensity, which is going to be just as difficult in say 3 or 4 days after that, to sort of replicate that open scenario, or that, that qualifier scenario where you have like a week to do everything. Your strength might not be necessarily as high as it has been coming out of just a strength building phase, but you're going to feel pretty comfortable under a heavy barbell, and you're going to be pretty comfortable doing heavy, barbell cycling type work as well. I think that, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. It seems quite difficult to get someone hyped up around a testing phase or something like that. But I think that just laying it out like that, and then getting people to understand that if you look at other sports, that's how it works. People go through, if you look at, Olympic sports, they go through their quad, which is their 4-year cycle. And then within their 4-year cycle, they may have competitions every single year that they're trying to go. And let's break this down in terms of like Olympic weightlifting, because I think that's something that the audience can understand. Is like, okay, well, you finished the Olympics in 2016, right? 2017, you go to World Championships, or you go to your competition, and you will probably total a little bit lower than you did at the Olympics, but that's okay. You're just practicing the sport. You're practicing competing on a bigger stage, and then you may go through a couple of years and then wait to go to the next World Championships, and that's where you're trying to put in a good effort, and you may be able to match, if not increased, obviously depending on where you are in your career, and then you're looking for the Olympics as that sort of final goal. Now, let's break that down into something a lot smaller. That is potentially how a CrossFit athlete or a functional fitness athlete could be looking at things. They could be looking at things over a year long period, and breaking things down into, say, 3-month sections and saying, okay, well, obviously if someone is a lot more developed and a lot more experienced, they're probably not going to be getting better, say every quarter. They're probably going to be better at one or two things, but may drop off on another thing. But then you also have to understand that the testing is always different. So it's very, very difficult for us to be giving people very tangible outcomes of like, okay, well, we project this being here. So I do believe that just having a bit more of a, paying attention to the long-term plan, but bringing your focus in on the day-to-day stuff and bringing your focus in on the training, because otherwise I think it can be, if the focus is too much in the future, then that can take a lot away from the energy and the investment that's put in day-to-day training, and you've got to think of that as the building blocks towards your performances in later competitions, right?
Yeah, we talk a lot about psychological platitudes like learn to enjoy the process, detach from results, all these kinds of things that if you read inspirational quotes on Instagram or pay attention to variety of podcasts in the fitness or business space that are kind of just pulling ideas from Stoic philosophy and Ryan Holiday, it's like, yeah, all those concepts are actually really, really relevant in terms of being able to step back from the sort of day-to-day, how am I doing? Where are my results? What's coming up next? And it's not just about being sort of busy in training. Let's say it's not just about having these immediate results that you're always shooting for. It's not just about really focusing on a specific thing that you need to accomplish or an event that you need to compete in. If you're trying to train with any sort of long-term consistency, even though the time in the gym may not be enjoyable in a fun sense, it needs to be fulfilling in that you're going to keep showing up because you want to be there for the sake of training itself and because you enjoy the actual process of getting better over time. And yeah, there's a balance to be found between that kind of more abstract, like invest in the process, learn to love the plateau, detach from results, etc., and the kind of like, okay, now's go time and I really need to put everything on the line and actually compete and see where I stand. But that this is an opportunity for people to really think about, okay, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I want to see my name somewhere on a leaderboard, right? I mean, we went through this when regionals was restructured, right? And Sanctionals took the place of regionals. A lot of folks were training with the express intention of qualifying for regionals. And it's like, well, guess what? You don't get to go to regionals anymore. You will get 0 Instagram followers from going to regionals now. Why are you in the gym? And a lot of people had to actually think about that because they were their reason for being in the gym was they wanted to qualify for regionals and achieve a certain amount of attention and notoriety within their local community and be able to update their Instagram bio, right? That was their actual motivation for showing up every day. And, some people are going to be more motivated by those external results, but in this scenario, right, we just don't know what the landscape is going to look like. And it's going to be changing probably on a weekly, fortnightly, monthly basis at this point. So the only way to actually continue to make effective progress during this time is not to have some sort of external reward that you're chasing, but to work on that internal process of motivation and understand what are you actually getting out of training? Why do you like doing this? And, connect your time in the gym and the investments that you're making into your training to that internal process rather than whatever external reward you've been chasing previously.
Yeah, I think. Well, the other day I watched the latest documentary. Was it The Fittest? And I think that one of the things that sort of is always very interesting with elite CrossFitters and the people who are at the very top is that there's like a level of they just seem very, very, very chilled out, and the best athletes seem very chilled out but super competitive as well. And, I don't necessarily think that they're the best example of like what you need to do in training because they're gifted people and they can respond to things a lot better than most other people. And, most other people are going to be highly overtrained if they try to replicate any of the volume and things like that. But I think the attitude that they have around their training is, it's geared up towards competition. They are very focused in on what they need to do for competition. Some people are obviously a little bit more intense than others, but it seems that the people who do really well in sport and who do really well under sort of the chaotic, under sort of the chaos of the sport, are those people who are just, they're confident that they trained hard enough and they're very, very competitive, and they're competitive with themselves. They don't train like idiots. I think you quickly learn that if you want to be able to do well in the sport for a long period of time, you've got to be fairly smart with things. But at the same time, they take it seriously, but there's also an element of fun that they have with it. And I know that, for me personally, because I'm a coach and because I sort of understand certain things around training, I know that in the past I've let that get in the way of things. And I think that, if I could go back at certain points within competing, I would probably just be a lot more relaxed about things and just focusing in on the day-to-day competition, the week-to-week throwdown that I have with buddies and that type of thing. And I think right now that's a real important aspect, is just figure out a way of maybe practicing some intensity, whether it's a throwdown with some friends in the gym. Try to get back to certain things like that. It could be just doing, if you're stuck at home training, it could be just doing the same burpee dumbbell workout as all of your friends on the Saturday, and then just having like a group text and just being like, all right, okay, what did I get and what do you get? I think it's important that there's people are looking for that right now, and when those competitions do come up, and they will, in whatever format that is going to be, I think people at that stage hopefully will feel pretty ready to go through it, and I think that there just needs to be a bit of patience around it. And I also hope that there is going to be maybe something positive to come from all of this in terms of the competitive field. I understand that some people may, if there's the uncertainty around CrossFit in the open is out there, they may be feeling like the prospect of national championships or their national leaderboard might not necessarily be there. I know that a lot of people have brought their training focus towards that, with things like regionals not being there anymore, and sanctional competitions has been really, really competitive now. If that's the case, you never know. If CrossFit don't put on something like that, it could be these sanctional events. They've had two, isn't it? Two qualifiers like every year for the sanctional events. Like, is it called the online qualifier or something?
Oh, you mean like the international online qualifier?
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, you can qualify for one of these, 5 sanctional events.
Yeah.
Through the same qualifier. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be the next thing. And I think that obviously once certain things start to hopefully iron themselves out, and then people are obviously going to start thinking about what they're going to do in terms of competing, and what competitions are going to be doing in terms of trying to create that platform for people. But yeah, bring it back to the gym, bring it back to the sort of enjoyment around training.
I think that there's some really interesting trade-offs and potential confusion for folks related to a lot of this advice and a lot of this discussion, because it seems like there's contradictions between, okay, you have to sort of detach from results while simultaneously understanding how to be competitive, right? You have to not invest a lot of emotional attachment into your numbers while simultaneously being aware of where you sit and prioritizing whatever key performance indicators you need to improve, right? That we're always talking about these trade-offs and sort of thinking about things on different layers, right? Where it's like, okay, the right thing to do in the abstract layer of a zoomed out view of your own training is to look at how you're progressing in certain areas over time and figure out what needs to be improved. The wrong thing to do is to treat each individual training session as some sort of referendum on your self-worth relative to how you competed compared to your expectations. And so it can be really tricky to find these balances. And like you were saying, Luke, that folks who are at an elite level are often this kind of a seemingly contradictory balance between being super chilled out and like pretty down to go with the flow, to being able to really just flip the switch and become super hyper competitive, either with themselves or with other people, right? And that in this climate where we don't actually know what's going on, that the ability to be super chilled out and not super attached to what's actually going to come down the pipeline in terms of the competition season, while simultaneously being able to decide, you know what, like a priority for me during this next period of training is to actually improve the skill of competing. So I need to be able to just internally flip the switch, you know, whether it's like you said, just doing the same workout with some buddies, either remotely or in the same place, or, you know, trying to just compete with my previous best on something, and to understand how to really dial that competitive mindset in without having the external structure of a specific thing that you're trying to qualify for, but simultaneously not putting too much weight or too much emotional self-worth into the actual results of that, right? That's really, really complicated and nuanced and very difficult for people to do. And I know we've talked about this a few times on this podcast, but you look at, you know, Michael Jordan's tendency to create perceived slights to motivate himself, right? It's like he simultaneously has this really bizarre competitive instinct that's probably unhealthy, combined with an actual love for the process of getting better, with an unbelievable work ethic and an ability to just kind of like manufacture something that forces him to be constantly competing in his own head. And yeah, he probably pushed that a little bit too far, but there's definitely something to be learned there of like, okay, if you don't have the external structure that is actually pushing you to compete or to have certain structure in your training right now, can you manufacture that in your own head in a way that's actually healthy for you and isn't some sort of net negative on your life? Thanks for listening. While you're here, go ahead and head over to your podcast player, subscribe to the show, give it a rating, give it a review, all that good stuff. You can also go ahead and click through to the show notes where you can find out more about us at legionsc.com, and also follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.